The Ever-Turning Wheel, Part 1. In this talk, we're going to be looking at the Wheel of Life, which is a classic representation of quite a large number of teachings of the Buddha, portrayed as a sort of visual aid. It's something that you find in really all the schools of Buddhism, and quite often a Wheel of Life will hang somewhere near the entrance of most temples and monasteries, and the practice in the Far East was that for when people came to the temple, they would have the Wheel of Life actually explained to them. Hopefully most people are familiar with what a Wheel of Life looks like. You can find plenty of them on the internet if you want to have a look for one. They do differ from the different countries, whether from India, China, Tibet, or Southeast Asia, Japan, and so forth. There are different variations and representations of it, but there are a number of common elements that appear on all of them. Looking at the picture, you will see that there is a large wheel, and it's in the grip of a rather fearsome-looking, monstrous creature with 3 eyes and 5 skulls in its headdress. It's got bulging eyes, teeth and claws. In some of the representations, this creature is just holding the wheel, whilst apparently roaring. In others, it appears to be taking a bite out of the top of the wheel. Then, if we look at the wheel itself, we can see that it's made up of a number of concentric circles. In the very centre, we have 3 animals chasing each other's tails. That's usually the cockerel, the pig, the male pig, the boar, and also the snake. Sometimes they're just piled one on top of the other, but in some of them they're giving this sense of chasing each other round, which reminds us that this wheel, although it's a static picture, is in fact turning. Hence the title of this talk, The Ever-Turning Wheel. Just out from them, there's an inner circle made up of half light and half dark, and you can see again images of beings going up and going down, again giving this notion of the turning wheel, rather common in fact to the Western medieval portrayal of the Wheel of Fate, which was a very common in the Middle Ages. Again, you can find many pictures of those too, and there Dame Fortuna would be turning a wheel, looking rather like the sort of thing that you find at the fairground, and there are kings at the top, and there are poor the miserable at the bottom, and so forth. Similar sort of idea, going up and down. Then coming back to our Buddhist Wheel of Life, moving out from there, you then get to the main body of the wheel, which is 6 realms. It looks like a pie that's been cut into 6 slices, and these are known as the 6 realms, and they are made up at the top. They're made up of the heavenly realms, and this is Buddhism, so there's 33 heavens, generally speaking. Moving in a clockwise direction, round about 1 o'clock, you get what are called the fighting demons. Moving on, you get the animal realm. At the very bottom, you get the hell realms. And then moving up, 7 o'clock, you get the hungry ghosts, and then at 10 o'clock you get the human realm. Sometimes the animal realm and the hungry ghosts are interchanged. It does vary a little, as I say, there are variations on this. So those are the 6 realms, and then moving outwards again onto the outer rim, you'll see that there are 12 pictographs, and these depict a teaching of the Buddha known as the Pratichat Samutpada, which means arising due to conditions. This is sometimes called the 12-link chain of arising due to conditions, the 12-link chain of causation, the 12-link chain of becoming. Well, you get the idea. And that's subject we will be dedicating a whole talk to next time. So in brief, those are the elements of the Wheel of Life, and as we begin to look more closely, we can see that there are some interesting details there. First thing just to start off with, before we move on to the sort of doctrines that this wheel portrays, we're just going to have a look that there are some of the teachings that we've already come across. That ferocious-looking creature that we see, this is Yama. Yama is the Lord of the Dead. It was believed in Indian mythology that when we died, we stood before the great judge, the Lord Yama, and that he would exact from us the price of our ill deeds, so to speak. And this is obviously a theme that's familiar to us as well. Here in the West, we also have this idea of death and judgment, post-mortem judgment here, a very common theme. And he looks ferocious. He has 3 eyes that represent the 3 phases of time, past, present and future, and those 5 skulls in his headdress actually represent the 5 skandhas, which we talked about last time. And the reason that they're portrayed as skulls is because they are all impermanent. So in fact we begin to get the sense of, well, who is this Yama, really the Lord of Death? When it comes to it, what he is our old friend, the principle of anicca, or impermanence. If we remember back at the beginning, the 3 signs of beings, we did that, didn't we? Impermanence, suffering and no I. This is impermanence, and we said that the whole of Buddhism really pivots on this teaching of anicca, that all things are impermanent. There is nothing in the universe, either inwardly or outwardly, that has any permanency about it. And why? Because everything that comes to be, all beings, that includes all situations, not just living beings, all circumstances, we could say, are brought about by causes and conditions that lie outside of those immediate conditions. Seeds from the past, conditions in the present, and so forth. The usual analogy that's given is the lighted candle, for example. There's fuel, there's air, there's ignition, and if those 3 are brought together in the right circumstance, then you get a burning candle. And if the air is removed, the flame goes out. If the wax burns up, the flame goes out. If there's no ignition, then there's no flame. So if any of those causes or conditions are missing, then the burning candle cannot come about. That situation cannot come about. There will be no illumination. And this is seen as a basic principle that permeates all things Buddhistically, not only in the physical world, but also inwardly as well. The same goes for our thoughts, our moods, our feelings, our points of view, our tastes, and so forth. If you remember, we looked at that a little bit with the skandhas, with Vedana, that all these, how we vote in an election, for example, doesn't just come out of nothing. It arises out of causes in the past, our views, our attitudes, our temperament, things that we were born with, our disposition, also our environmental, our memories from the past, and also the conditions in the present as well. What's happening to us, our current mood, our current thinking, and so forth. These things all feed into making a tick on a box, for example, at an election. So this is really very much what the Wheel of Life is about in essence, and as we go through it, we'll see that we keep returning to this theme. So that great creature Yama, why does he look so ferocious? Well, he looks ferocious because right at this moment he's taking away something I'm extremely fond of. In essence, as we've said, he's just impermanence, the principle of impermanence, a perfectly neutral principle in the universe, the principle of coming to be and ceasing to be. In its essence, it's neither good nor bad, but if he happens to be taking away something that I'm inordinately fond of, then he looks absolutely terrifying. Of course, if he happens to be taking away something that I don't like, then he's a delivering angel. and wears a quite different mask. And this is something that's useful for us as well, because from the point of I, everything is personal. We see everything from our own point of view, and we see things in relation to ourselves. And if we are doing a little bit of practice and a little bit of meditation and daily life practice, then we know that a lot of our thoughts are preoccupied with precisely the subject. How something affects me, what I think of it, whether I think it's right or it ought to be, whether I want it or don't want it. All these things are always in relation to this idea of myself, I, me and mine, which the Buddha said was just an appearance, and that this is not really how things are in truth, in reality. So the Yama shows us there that impermanence and that connection with suffering as well, and through that obviously also points through to the lion's roar of the Buddha's own insight of no I, anatta. So already we see portrayed before us the three signs of being, and this lays down the context for everything, all objects that we come across in the universe. So when we come forward a bit now and we have a look at the Wheel of Life, we begin to see the process by which things come to be, because there's a problem that has arisen, as we talked about last time. The Buddha declared no I, that there's no agency. So if I'm not doing the talking and you're not doing the listening, then how do these things happen? What's the process by which these things happen? And that Wheel of Life is there to describe that process from that Buddhist point of view. Just one thing before we do leave Yama, those portrayals of Yama where he's biting into the wheel, by the way, iconographically this is rather nice, because this shows how impermanence eats everything up in the end. What he's doing is devouring the wheel. Because death eats everything in the end. Just as a slight aside, I come from a small town on the east coast in Yorkshire, and I remember when my parents were alive, I going back there once, and they'd rebuilt the surgery there, and there'd been quite a commotion in the local papers because people thought that it was in very poor taste that the weather vane on top of the surgery was the Grim Reaper. People thought this was very inappropriate until the doctors pointed out that it wasn't the Grim Reaper, it was Old Father Time. But of course it's interesting because the Grim Reaper and Old Father Time look very similar. They both carry that scythe, don't they, that with which they cut the strings of time. And from a distance, one can't actually tell the difference. And it's a little bit like with Yama as well, because Old Father Time and the Grim Reaper are, of course, one and the same principle. It's time that kills us in the end, or the effects of time that kills us in the end. So here we have the same with Yama as well. We have exactly the same symbol here in the East. So these are very common themes. Common symbols that appear throughout humanity, really, because they affect all of us in our situations. So coming forward and having a look at the wheel a little bit more closely, we can see that there are those three animals at the centre, and we've come across them as well. These are known as the kleshas, they're known as the passions. This is the emotional household, which in Buddhism is simplified to delusion, and the two accompanying passions, which is wanting and not wanting. Sometimes it's called greed and hatred, or greed and anger, but wanting and not wanting is much more general. Of course, we have many words to describe the emotional household. The poets are very skilled at showing the nuances of the passions too, and their effects. But in Buddhism we keep it simple. We stick with just three, because what we're interested in fact, is not the various names of the emotions. What we're interested in is the movement that's connected with them. So with wanting something, we want to incorporate it from out there into ourselves. We want to get hold of it and bring it in. With not wanting something, we want to expel it, exorcise it, annihilate it, get rid of it somehow, from in here, out there. And of course, for both of those to happen, there needs to be a perception, an incorrect perception, Buddhistically speaking, that there is a separation between myself and other. Otherwise, there's nowhere to get the thing from, and there won't be, and to take it to somewhere. And neither, if I want to get rid of something, neither can I take it from myself and put it out there, if there is no out there to put it out into, if we see. So hence it's said that when any of the passions arise, wanting or not wanting, it's always in the presence of delusion. Clearly it's a prerequisite for those to happen. And this is really the essential point, Buddhistically speaking. Remember that Buddhism really just teaches what's essential to walking the Buddha's path. It's not really interested in nuances outside of that, or interpretations outside of that, really. And these three animals are at the centre of the wheel: the cockerel representing greed, the snake representing aversion, and the boar, the male pig, representing ignorance, because he sticks his tusks into the ground, flicks the earth over his head in order to wash himself, get rid of the parasites in his hide, and sometimes that dirt gets in his eyes and it means he can't see clearly, and so this is why the boar represents not seeing or ignorance. So those three really are the powerhouse behind the whole thing. And as we said, the next inner circle, the light and dark, represent the circulation of beings rising up and falling down. And here we have the opposites, and this is what it's showing, that when we have the presence of delusion, when we have that basic split between I and other, we now have our judging. Because in order to make those judgments, I need to stand back. I need to actually separate myself from and ask myself, what do I think of that? A little bit like the sports commentator who sits in the box up on the sideline. He's not part of the action that's taking place on the field, but he's passing opinion on it. And that's mentally, that is what we do as well. We're involved with living, but we also separate ourselves from it, and we ask ourselves, well, how do I feel? And I say, well, this interests me, that bores me, I want to do this, I don't want to do that. These are all the inherent judgments in things, and, also about my own performance and your performance, and so forth, how well my meditation's going. All that sort of thing really is very much part and parcel of that I judging, and that splits things into light and dark, because it's not just that light and dark exists, and in Zen there's a great deal made of this, the interplay between what's called the opposites, because whilst I am ghosting around, is whenever I see a difference, I immediately, and really quite subliminally as well, place a judgment on it. I see a difference, and then I want to know which one is better, which one is worse. So is light better than dark, or is dark better than light? Is it better to go up or better to go down? And this is very much infects our thinking all the way through. We don't see things neutrally. This light and shade, again, when we begin to really examine the content of our thoughts, we realise that our thinking possesses a lot of in judgments embedded in them, and these judgments are based on how things relate to me, what I think is the good thing, what I think is the bad thing or the evil thing, and so on. So it's very keenly portrayed there on the Wheel of Life. And next we come to, because we're moving quite swiftly through, this is just really a general overview, we move to the 6 realms. And these 6 realms, as we've been through them, from the heavenly realms to the hell realms and everything in between, these usefully for us can be seen as a psychological map. These represent states of consciousness that arise. And if we remember that samsara, the term samsara, which is used to describe the realm of desire, if we remember samsara as juxtaposed with nirvana, the early Indian Buddhists were interested in escaping from samsara to nirvana. Samsara actually means endlessly traversing through state after state, and endlessly wandering about through one state after another. And we have to recognize that this wheel of life represents a closed system. And if we now just turn our focus inwardly a little bit and reflect back to how we woke up this morning, if we were to put a name on that from the wheel of life, say the 6 realms, maybe we woke up in bright sunshine. If we're a morning person, we spring out of bed. We were feeling very human. Maybe a little bit in the godlike realm. It's a good day. It's going to be a good day. Feeling very positive. A little bit that destiny's on our side. Destiny, of course, is something that's heaven sent traditionally. And we go through to the kitchen, having had our shower and so forth, and open the fridge door. Just put the kettle on to make our morning coffee. And what do we find? We find an empty milk bottle in the fridge. And suddenly that heavenly realm is punctured, and we now go over and we're in the fighting demon realm. And we're actually shuttling between the fighting demon realm and the hungry ghost, because I want some milk for my coffee, and I haven't even got my shoes and socks on. And there's none there, and so I become upset about that. How many times have I told them not to put an empty milk bottle in? If you finish it, go and get some more. It's only polite. It really is not the done thing. And so we go on throughout the day, and maybe that upsets me a bit, and I drink the coffee black, and I feel that I haven't had my morning coffee, and I'm now in a bit of a dark mood. And there I am down in the animal realm, because I'm feeling put upon, victim of circumstances. Everything was going so well until all this happened. Why me? And the animal realm is a little bit the realm of sort of no redress, the victim. A little bit. It means a number of things, but anyway, that's certainly one of them. And this is how we circulate through. And we have to remember, the Buddha was very clear. There is no I, but what there are these collections of states. There are these states that arise and pass away throughout our day. And what's more, these states of consciousness condition how we perceive the situation around us, and that conditions how we act and speak and think in those situations as well. So this is a whole. This comes all in one go. Although we're analysing it and looking at it in little pieces, this is a whole situation. And what's important to recognise is that there is no I in it. What we have is this continual succession of states. So that gives us sort of a taste of really how this wheel portrays consciousness. And as we go deeper into the practice, this wheel of life becomes extremely important, and it's a very useful tool as an object of meditation. It can be used directly to help us really begin to dissect and take apart our own states of consciousness, which can be analysed down into these elements so that they can clearly be seen in awareness. This is why we cultivate awareness. This is why we cultivate what's called the mindfulness. Prefer the daily life practice because it takes place in daily life. When we give ourselves into what at this moment is being done, instead of being carried off by circumstances all the time, then we begin to see this passing of states, this continual succession of states, and we realise that, yes, my God, there is no end to it. And these states, in a sense, we are subject to, because I can't alter them by an act of will. I mean, for example, if somebody stands on my toe, it hurts. I can't just wish it away. And if I become upset because of something you said, I may know it's foolish. I may even know it's not really your fault. But because of things that happened to me when I was growing up, it triggers something. It triggers an effect, and I'm subject to those things. And actually what we discover after a while is that although I say I'm subject to these things, in fact I am these things. And I remember very much this realization coming to me when I first started Zen training. One thing I was given as a practice method was to develop a simple timetable. Time to get up, time to go to bed, time for zazen, sitting meditation. Just a few simple things, not to overstuff it, but particularly the getting up and the going to bed, 6 days a week. And I remember because I used to like to wake up in the morning and switch on the radio and listen to it for 10-20 minutes whilst I sort of woke up, because I'm not the sort that sort of springs out of bed, fully armed for the day. It takes me a little bit of time, naturally. So when I was told that when the alarm goes off, get up straight away, okay, I thought I'll do this. First couple of days I did it. It was no problem because it was sort of new. But after about a week, I woke up one morning and thought, no, I'm not going to do it today. And then the following day, I think I managed it. And then the day after that, I thought, oh, no, I really like listening to the radio, 10 minutes is not a problem. Hit the snooze button or whatever. I'll get up once the headlines are over, then suddenly you realise that, oh, my goodness, I'm supposed to be doing this practice and somehow I've stopped doing it. And then you think, right, I've really got to pull myself together to do it. And on night, just as I was going to bed, I would have a firm resolve that I was going to get up when the alarm went off. And the following morning, the alarm went off, and I would just switch the radio on and lie there. And then I'd feel really bad about doing it, but I wouldn't get up. And this went on and on and on, and I couldn't understand it. Why is it that I would be so full of firm resolve the night before, and then when I woke up in the morning, I thought, to hell with this, I'm not bothered. And finally the penny dropped. It's not the same person who's making that intention, is different to the one who wakes up first thing in the morning. Oh my God, this is a different state on that very self-same wheel of life. So it was quite a revelation and really helped me begin to look at the wheel of life in a quite different way, to realise how practical it actually is. Now, I want to say just something very briefly about karma, because in fact what this wheel of life is about the process of karma. And next week, or next time, we're going to be looking at the Praticca Samutpada, this 12-link chain, which is really, it's the detailed breakdown of the process of karma. And we will be looking at that more in more detail. But I just want to say a couple of things about karma, because this is a word that's now slipped into common usage, and there are a number of interpretations of it, and we sort of need to be clear exactly what interpretations we're talking about in these talks. Now, it's certain to say that at one time, and it's true to say that at one time, and even now in certain parts of the Buddhist world, that the 6 states are seen quite literally as 6 worlds, whereas this world is the human world, and there are other worlds out there somewhere where there are heavens and there are hells and so forth, and fighting demons and so forth, and that we are reborn. Literally at the end of this life, we may be reborn in a heavenly realm or a fighting demon or a hungry ghost or a hell realm. And these are taken as very literal interpretations of that. I'm actually putting a bracket around those and drawing a sort of circle around those, quite simply to say that this is spiritual literature, and we should never confuse religious language with scientific language. These are 2 different ways of speaking, and they talk about information in two very different ways, and they have different outcomes for them. If we take religious language literally, then we end up like the creationists, having to argue in the face of overwhelming scientific evidence that the world was created in 6 days. But the problem is that if we are on the other foot, and if we say, well, the world wasn't created in 6 days, obviously that was completely incorrect. It was a load of nonsense, and we can forget about it. That might also be hasty as well. With religious language, yet there's no doubt that obviously people in the past obviously really did believe that literally. But before we throw something away, it's always useful just to ask the question, well, if it's not literally true, then how might it be true? What other possible interpretations might this actually have? And it's the same when it comes to karma as well, because a little bit, and you even hear it here in the West, people sort of say, well, if something bad happens to you, that's your karma. Actually, that's not exactly what Buddhists believe. There are other forms of causation. Karma is simply one of them. There's the physical universe, the physical laws. There are psychological laws as well. And so we have to ask, to what does karma actually pertain? Well, karma is the moral law, actually. It's about how our actions condition what we become. And this is very much not so much whether I become a wealthy man or whether I become a pauper. And really this gives the lie to that whole notion. And I mean, yes, you'll find it in Buddhist texts as well, that there are, these ideas that, people who are very generous in previous lives, end up being kings and nobles, and that people who were nasty end up being, disabled and poor, and so forth. That was an interpretation that was subscribed to at times, and there are maybe places in the world where people still go along with that. But really, a little bit of reflecting on it makes us realise that possibly couldn't be, because obviously if people are very wealthy and high status because of their great generosity in previous lives, one would expect a higher incidence of generosity in the top 1%, and conversely at the bottom of the heap, where people who are very poor or in very great dire straits and suffer great personal difficulties, or diseased or disabled, one would expect them to be selfish and greedy and nasty. In a world where karma operates in that very basic interpretation, that's what one would expect. And so then we have to ask ourselves, is that what we see in the world? Well, I shall leave you to make your own mind up about that. So all we're really talking about here is that this is a principle. Karma is the principle of cause and effect, but we have to be careful how we interpret it. And also we have to remember that this is Buddhism, and Buddhism there are two truths. There's the absolute truth, the way things really are, and then there's the relative truth, which is actually not true, but it's it's true enough to help us along the way towards the absolute truth. But it itself is not true. This is why the Buddha said on that parable of the raft that all his teachings, they were for crossing over the river of life from samsara to nirvana. They're not for seizing hold of. And when we come to interpretations like karma and so forth, we need to be very careful. Buddhism talks a lot about compassion and wisdom. If we find ourselves using karma to excuse ourselves from our human responsibilities, then we have to ask ourselves, is this actually what the Buddha wanted us to do? Is this the way the Buddha wanted us to go, to sort of say, I'm all right, Jack. If you're in a bad way, then that's your own fault. Is that really what the Buddha wanted us, the sort of people that the Buddha wanted us to become? I mean, the Buddha was all compassion, so it would seem unlikely. I mean, let's just say it's not. So then we have to ask ourselves, okay, how do we interpret these things? Well, okay, if we imagine that we're in a world where we have continuous rebirth, and it's been continuous rebirth since the beginning of time, then, I see somebody less fortunate than myself, and I think to myself, where you are, I was there once, and in the future I will be there again as well. It just so happens that in this life I am in a high status and you're in a low status. If I was in your shoes, how would I wish to be treated? And then I would act accordingly. I would treat that person how I myself would wish to be treated in those circumstances. That interpretation is going to give us a much more humane and empathetic response, which is much more aligned with the values that the Buddha taught. So interpretation is very important, and we have to remember that in dealing with this material, with what we could call spiritual truths or religious truths, they are different. They're not objective in the sense of scientific laws and principles, even though sometimes they may be very analogous, but they should not be treated in the same way. And we should always be seeing that they are vessels, they are vehicles for travelling, vehicles for becoming better human beings in the end. Okay, well, we'll leave the part 1 there. That gives us a brief overview of the Wheel of Life. Next time we come back and we look at the rim of the wheel, the 12-link chain,